Welcome to our epic ocean, where critical solutions to a planet in peril are brought to the surface. Our epic ocean celebrates all that is epic about the ocean and why it is the planet's most vital resource. And now to our host, Rich Gurman.
Hello, ocean lovers. It's Rich, and my guest today is the CEO of the Surfrider Foundation, who is one of our great partners for my nonprofit project. We'll talk about that a little bit. In addition to both of us being ocean-loving brothers, we also share a Laguna Beach connection. And it took me years to find this magical place. Chad was lucky enough to grow up here. Chad Nelsen, welcome to our epic ocean. How are you, man?
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me, Rich. Glad to be here.
I really appreciate you spending the time with us. So, we're going to get into the specifics around Surfrider and your work, but first you got to tell me about your journey to becoming one of the leader of one of the top ocean protection organizations in the world. I know your dad founded what is now the Ocean Institute in Dana Point. You were a lifeguard here. I believe your brother is still a surf guide. You helped create a marine reserve in Puerto Rico. You helped Trestles here in San Clemente from becoming a 6-lane toll road. You have done a lot, man. So give us some history.
Yeah, no, happy to do that. It's funny, quick aside, I was surfing down at Uppers this morning, and it was just, the waves were small, but it was beautiful out. And, there's like a little wetland there and this inlet, and there's, reeds and ducks in there. And it was just spectacular. And it's funny, I was thinking, like, thank goodness that this place is not the belly of a freeway. So, but yeah, I feel really lucky to be doing the work that I do, and really at the end of the day, the reason that I'm doing it is because I was, gifted basically by my parents this incredible life in, near, and amongst the ocean. So, I was actually born in Long Island in New York, and when I was 3 months old, my dad got a teaching job in Orange County in Newport Beach, Corona del Mar at Harbor Day, and moved us out here in 1970. After that he left that job to go teach at what was then the Orange County Marine Institute. It was pretty cool. Orange County was small then, and every school in Orange County had a week-long curriculum about oceanography, which he taught at this marine lab. So he's a ocean science educator. So I grew up as a kid going to his office, which was the coolest place in the world because it had, the seats for the kids were whalebone vertebra. He had aquariums with octopus and shrimp and lobsters and crabs. And so it was just an ocean science playground.
Nice.
Yeah, so and I have a good story about my dad taught an octopus to shake hands, so I'll tell you about that. Pretty memorable thing. So I grew up here in Laguna Beach, surfer, fisherman, swimmer, lifeguard. Watched Orange County transform from a pretty sleepy place to a very busy place, and saw some of the impacts of that on the coast in the ocean, and that's kind of what motivated me to get into this work. A mentor of mine who is Sarah Lowell's dad, was a friend of my dad's, was actually the one who told me, hey, you can actually turn your love for the ocean into a career as an environmentalist. And I went back, I spent a lot of time in college, grad school, and beyond studying ocean policy and ocean science, and that's kind of what got me here today.
That's beautiful. So it started really with your father. You were just kind of born into, luckily, this magical world of ocean love, ocean life. And then was there like a turning point moment where you were like, you were seeing the changes that occurred? I can only imagine how the whole beach and environment was in 1970 as you were a little kid compared to how it is now. Was there a turning point moment where you were like, this needs to really become my life's work?
That's a great question. I don't think there was any distinct moment where I was like, I gotta do this. It was more I love the ocean so much. it's been everything to me in so many ways. Like, how do I give back? Well, this is a way to do it. It's interesting. While I was lifeguarding in Laguna, um, I remember watching in one of the private coves, I won't name which one, uh, a dump truck or like a front loader full of, which I didn't know what it was. I watched this thing. I'm sitting in the lifeguard tower, middle of the day. There's nobody down there. I watched this thing drive right up to the edge of the ocean. And I'm like, what is it doing? I couldn't figure it out. And it dumps the front loader into the ocean right in the swash zone. And it was full of yellow paint and gallons and gallons and gallons and gallons of it. And it was from, they were painting the streets. So this was the yellow divider line paint that the guy just was like, "Oh, I'm done with it." I remember that so vividly because I was like, "What do I do?" Today I think the reaction would have been very different.
Yeah.
I don't think anything really came of it at the time, but that was one of those moments. And then the other thing, which I didn't understand at the time what it meant, but you know, when I was this was like the mid '80s. I started lifeguarding, got into spearfishing, got certified to dive, and I was going out off the reefs in Laguna. I was fishing off the rocks with my buddies, and we were going out spearfishing at night, in the day. We couldn't catch anything, and we thought we were just bad at it, like so we would go talk to the older guys, like, what are we doing wrong? Where and they all just said to us very matter of factly, the ocean's fished out. Like, we caught it all. And I remember, so at the time, just sort of accepting that.
Mhm.
Oh, I guess, you should have been here in the 60s, was kind of the 70s. That was kind of the attitude. And it was no longer abundant. And it wasn't until years later when I was studying marine ecology that I recognized that, A, that's bad.
Right.
B, it doesn't have to be that way.
You gave me chills when you said the line, we caught it all. One of the you probably know this. My last book that I put out is called Blue Laguna. It's a photo
Yep.
book of dolphin and whale shots that I've taken off from my stand-up paddleboard here in Laguna. And the book, I really created it as a celebration of not only the marine protected area, the MPA that we have here, but the no-take zone that went into effect was a January 1st, 2012.
Yep.
Because to your point, I was paddling every single day for a couple of years leading up to that. And there wasn't any fish out there. I mean, you would paddle out on days where the water were clear, you look down, you wouldn't see anything. And then, I kid you not, man, it was 6 months into the no-take zone going into place. No-take meaning it became against the law to fish.
Yeah, no
on a
fishing in
six-
that whole zone. Yep.
Yeah, there's a 6 mile stretch of coast right here in Laguna Beach,
Yeah.
California. And it goes out. It's not like a straight line box, but it
Yeah, it's
goes
a
out.
triangle. It's a weird shape. Yep.
Yeah, kind of a weird shape, and goes out to like 2, 3 miles offshore.
Yeah, three
But
miles. That's the corner.
exactly. But the bottom line is you can't fish. It's against a lot of fish in that area. And 6 months into it, which is not a long time, I would paddle out and I looked down and I saw fish everywhere. And I'm thinking, no. I'm like, there's no way that in just 6 months this kind of dramatic change would occur. And I remember talking to my buddy who used to be a commercial fisherman. I said, Charlie, is this possible that just leaving the ocean alone for this short little time could create this just influx of fish? And he said, absolutely. And this was 6 months in, and now this is what, 9 years later. Chad, I call our backyard here the greatest aquarium in the world. Like the fish and the abundance of wildlife and octopus, which you mentioned, which we'll talk. I would definitely want to come back to the handshake of the
Yeah, yeah.
octopus and dolphins and whales. Like, I mean, it is amazing the wildlife that we have here off our coast.
It really is. And the difference between now and when I was a kid is just, it's extraordinary. And, it's interesting that you talked about how quickly it came back because, the general theory is, and it makes sense, the quicker the life cycle of the animal, the quicker they come back, right? So like lobster are like the insects of the sea, and they grow very quickly and reach maturity in 3-4 years, and so they respond, kind of like the mosquitoes, like really quickly to opportunity. And you look under some of the rocks now out there, and there's dozens of them. Used to be hard to find any.
Yeah.
the longer lived species, some of these rockfish that live to 30 years and don't really become fecund until later in their life, they're going to be slower to respond. But you know, I remember going out off of Moss Cove, one of the beaches kind of in central-ish Laguna, and seeing a school of sheephead and 30 or 40 fish circling, something I never saw as a kid. And some of them were big, and they take time to get to maturity. So I asked a marine ecologist. They said, "What was like? There's no way those fish are 8 years old." Like, and they said, "Hey, look, they were hiding. They were deep in the cracks. They knew that they were like hunted. They're not that dumb, and so they're now out because And so I think part of the comeback was all the fish had been hiding in all the rocks for fear of being, shot by a spear gun, and now
Uh,
they're like out because there's no longer danger or a threat. So I found that fascinating too. I was like, wow, this is pretty interesting to see.
I've heard the same thing, and it's kind of crazy. And we'll talk more about fishing. Like, I get why the no take zone was and still is controversial. I
Yeah,
get why somebody would want to hop on a board and drop a line in the water and catch a fish. And I think we'll hold off on that conversation for a while, but we'll talk about the
yeah,
30
yeah,
30, the 30
yeah,
30 initiative, and which
yeah.
is kind of it ties into that. But tell me a little bit more about your journey with Surfrider. Not everybody watching will know exactly what Surfrider is, but you've been there for a long time now. Just give me
Yeah,
a little
20
more
plus
history
years.
on how you became to run the joint.
Yeah, so the Surfrider Foundation is a grassroots coastal conservation organization. It was founded in 1984 in Malibu, California. And we kind of focus on community-based conservation, scale that up to the state, local, and even global level. Kind of focus on 5 areas: beach access, plastic pollution, clean water, we call coastal preservation, so like coastal erosion, storm development issues, and then ocean protection, which is kind of has two sides to it. One's defensive, stopping things like offshore drilling, so things threats in the ocean,
Hmm.
and some of it's proactive, like establishing marine protected areas, marine parks to conserve the ocean. And we have 80 chapters around the United States. I run Surfrider's domestic organization, so we're on from British Columbia to San Diego, the Gulf, up the East Coast to Maine, and even in the Great Lakes. And Really, it's really about volunteer community action, making change. Um, when I was growing up, I was kind of vaguely aware Surfrider was out there. When I went to grad school, um, I went to Duke to a marine policy grad program, and I was broke. So I came home and I worked for my dad, who runs a summer camp, ocean adventure camp, uh, and lived at home to make some money. And I volunteered a couple of days a week at the Surfrider office, and just fell in love with the place. This was 1995. Uh, got finished my graduate degree, got some jobs, and in 1998, a job opened at Surfrider to run us one of the environmental programs. I jumped at it, did that, kind of worked my way up to leading the science and policy shop, and then about 6 years ago, um, took over running the organization. And it's just been a wild ride. In that 20-year period, we've went from 5 staff and less than a $1 million budget to now 65 staff, national presence, almost $10 million budget. So the organization's really grown in its size and effectiveness.
That's amazing. And I want to break down those five main areas. We'll get there.
Yeah.
But I got to ask you first. So obviously Surfrider, like you said, is all about community. It's about getting together in person, be it at the beach or at the city hall. We are now finding ourselves living in a virtual world. So how have you adapted to that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right about that. I mean, we're really a people-based organization at sort of every level, and so almost everything we do is group activities, right? Like you said, beach cleanups, movie night, expert speaker, city hall. So we had to really reinvent the whole organization and figure out how to do things digitally. We're in the early days of COVID, we just ceased doing a lot of our activities. Our chapter meetings, we went to Zoom like everybody else for everything. Um, we actually did a lot of work. Kudos to my team to figure out how to be effective in a city council meeting. So one of the beauties of Surfrider is this network. So we have people all over the country sitting in on the Laguna Beach City Council meeting, the Seabright, New Jersey City Council meeting, so we can quickly say, hey, these guys are doing it well. This isn't working. We actually were giving, in some cases, the city some advice on how to run an effective meeting because we're seeing so many versions of it. As the restrictions, as we learned more, we started doing like solo beach cleanups and trying to do as much as we could to keep our activities going in a way that was safe and responsible. But yeah, it's been a challenge for us. I mean, we actually had a really good year in 2020. We one of our primary impact metrics is how many of these campaign wins we get. Did a city ban plastic bags? Did we pass a state law? So anytime there's like an official decision made, that's what we tick off as a victory. And we had 68 of those last year, and our two best years prior to that were 80 and 100, the years prior. So right in the kind of mix. So we were able to advance a lot of really good sort of ocean and coastal conservation despite living in a digital world.
That's amazing, actually, considering, our Blue City Network program is a city-related program that we launched last year, which was probably the worst year to launch anything dealing with cities. So the fact that you were able to get 68 of those through in 2020 is something to be really proud of. So really good work. And it kind of leads to my next question. It seems like the news about the state of the planet always takes a back seat to politics. So my question is, how do you break through the noise? How do you stay focused on your mission in the midst of so much political division, cultural change, just everything that's happening in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. It was interesting because, certainly COVID was understandably the priority, and then all of the subsequent impacts, right? The job loss and humanitarian challenges with people with housing and everything else. But there were a couple issues related to COVID that were relevant for us. One was, and we saw this in Laguna, is that when everything shut down last March, a year ago, interestingly enough, people flooded to the beach, right? So bars, restaurants, museums, amusement parks, city parks in some cases were all closed. People lost their jobs or had newfound flexibility, rushed to the beach. Then we closed all of our beaches. I think in Laguna they were closed for
7 weeks.
Yeah, and
7 long weeks.
I know, and we actually assembled a expert task force of sort of like coastal access policy law people, public health folks, and some people in government, and put together some best practices on how to open beaches, work with the governor in California and Orange County too, because we knew being outside is important. We pretty quickly realized you could do it safely and be socially distanced. Things that seem kind of normal now. That was in the time when that wasn't. Can we touch the handrails? These were the things we were worried about, and so we were able to help open beaches all across the country, kind of in that post-COVID shutdown. And then the other big question people had was, can you catch COVID through dirty water?
The water,
Whether
yeah.
it's urban runoff or wastewater. So we did a lot of research on that. So we actually found some places where we felt like our mission intersected with questions that had to do with COVID and focused on those. And you just keep plugging away on these issues. A lot of these campaigns that we work on are multi-year, so they have some momentum prior to COVID and can kind of keep them going.
Very good. So as you know, there's been, I think, partly because a lot of people have been out of work, partly because people just want to be outside in fresh air, but there's been an explosion in the surf industry. I just got a new paddleboard, and man, it took me months and months to get that darn thing because the shaper was just crazy busy. So there's been this explosion in surfing and in outdoor and ocean recreation in general. What have the implications of this been, both good and bad?
Yeah, I mean, it is incredible. There were some sort of market research through the Surf Industry Manufacturing Association. They're like the trade group for the surf industry. And they estimated that participation in surfing in the United States was about 3 million people in April. And they did it again, which jives with kind of the general numbers of surfing that you hear
Mm-hmm.
year after year, about 3 million
Mm-hmm.
participants. And then they did it again in August and it was 6 million,
Oh, geez.
5.5 million. So we've seen almost a doubling in the number of people surfing, which in many ways is great. And Surfrider is part of a group called the Outdoor Alliance. It's all the human-powered outdoor recreation groups, the IMBA, the mountain bikers, Access Fund, the climbers, the Winter Wildlands Alliance, which is the backcountry skiers. And in talking to them, this is happening across all sports. So like mountain biking is seeing it, rock climbing is seeing it, backcountry skiing is seeing it. So I think the good news is, given the opportunity and the time, Americans want to go get outside, and that's good. It's good for the health of our community and us as humans. As you know, it's good for you on like a mental and physical and spiritual levels, and it's also good in terms of building more advocates for open space and public lands and water. So that's the good news. The bad news is, and you've seen it here in Laguna, and it's been true everywhere, is crowds create challenges. So, the waves are crowded, that could create conflict, parking, traffic. So figuring out how to manage the influx of people. It's having, pretty horrifying impacts in the backcountry where we're seeing an unprecedented number of avalanche deaths, which is really tragic, And there's also been litter. There's really been an explosion of plastic pollution. More people, not everyone has the same sort of ethic about cleaning up. More takeout, right? So they've mostly come back, but there was a lot of suspension of our plastics and reusable laws. So you used to be able to bring your coffee cup into any coffee shop in California and get a refill, or they brought the bags back to the markets for a while, and so that combination of more plastic in the system, more people, it just resulted in trash everywhere. So we're starting to, I think, come out of that, but that increased visitorship is going to continue, and I think we need to both help people understand, how to share public spaces in a way that's positive to avoid conflict, and then also how to be good stewards, pack it in, pack it out, and some awareness about, taking care of these places we love.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because guys like you and I, of course, we want to encourage people to be outside, to be on the ocean, in the ocean, to love nature. But then when 3 million surfers turns into 6 million. Fortunately, as a paddleboard, I don't have that problem. There's never too many people out where I paddle, but I can
Plenty of
imagine
space.
there's unlimited space out there. But I can imagine too many guys and gals on the same wave could be a challenge for a surfer
Yeah.
for sure. How do we create balance there?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting. I think historically, like when I grew up surfing, for better or worse, maybe mostly worse, there was a lot of this localism, but there was also like an apprenticeship. So, you started out over in the small waves and you watched the older guys, and if you screwed up, they certainly let you know about it. And over time, you learn the etiquette, because it's all unspoken rules about who has priority, where you should go and where you shouldn't go to stay out of people's way. So I think some education on that etiquette is really important, because a lot of people don't know it now. They jump into the sport and there's no surfing 101 that's, that you get when you get your first surfboard. So there's some of that. And I think, we just need to, learn to share, understand that things are going to be different, and there's certain places are going to be crowded. Hey, look, if I go hike on the Alta Laguna Ridge Trail on Saturday at 2 p.m., I can't go ripping down that thing on my mountain bike because I know it's going to be crowded and people are out walking. If you want to do that, you can do it at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. You'll be the only one out there.
Yeah.
So, some of that I think is just understanding that, hey, it's going to be crowded, and learning to share and sharing the knowledge and everything else.
So basic etiquette, respect, and learning from people that have done it before you for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
one more thing on that.
yeah.
It's interesting. Duke Kahanamoku, right, the legendary surfer from Hawaii, you know, he took the gift of surfing and traveled the world and taught people how to surf in California and in all over South America, Europe, and so I always think like he was a guy who said this is surfing is this gift and I'm going to share this with the world, right? None of us would be surfing if he hadn't decided to sort of share that gift. And and that was this spirit of aloha. And
Mm.
and I think like that's something else to remember too, right? All these new surfers, they're excited and so we should be thinking more like Duke, and share the gift.
I
So
love that. Yeah, and I always look at it that way, that the ocean is a gift, and it's the gift that always continues to give, and it gives us, you get it, I'm preaching to the choir, it gives us so much
yeah,
that we need to give back. That's why you do what you do. That's why I do what I do. In fact, if we look back at the last year or so, as challenging as it has been in so many ways, there was obviously a lot of positive impact when the world basically stopped, right? We had
yep.
less emissions, less cars, less airplanes. The water was cleaner. There was dolphins in in the canals of Venice, and the water was so clear. My question is, as the world turns back on, which it is right now, do you think we're going to learn the lesson, or are we just going to crank it right back up to 11?
It's really, really a great question. The great reset or the great pause, they've called it, and I I hope that because I think another piece of this too, and it's certainly been true for me, and we're so lucky, right? We live in a beautiful place that's not accessible to everybody in the world just because
Right.
it's so darn expensive. But you know, you tuned into your local environments and found out how much is there. But I do hope that people have a greater appreciation for nature, for slowing down and getting off that crazy pace that everyone was on, and I hope that translates into you know a different ethic, and we don't just get right back on the sort of crazy train of consumption and madness and everything else. It's hard to know at this point,
Yeah.
but I think anyone who's an environmentalist is inherently an optimist. You don't do this work unless you think that it's going to get better.
That's right.
So the optimist in me hopes that maybe this is part of a sort of a change in our sort of shared mentality about our planet.
I'm 100% with you. I'm definitely have this optimistic side of me. And I actually never really thought about it that, of course, I wouldn't do what I do unless I was an optimist. But
Yeah.
I also have this side of me that's a realistic, and sometimes I don't know, my faith in humanity sometimes gets tested. So we'll have to see what happens, and we just got to keep doing the work. So
Yeah.
let's break down the focuses of Surfrider. You mentioned the five, and I want to talk about
Hmm.
each one. Let's start with plastic. You
Yep.
mentioned a couple times already. Obviously, the pandemic has changed so many things for everyone, including you and Surfrider, and COVID has only added to the issue of plastic pollution. I interviewed a mutual friend of ours on another episode, Deanna Cohen at Plastic
Yep.
Pollution Coalition, and in that conversation, a report had just come out that Amazon in 2019, not 2020, 2019, Amazon used, I think it was 470 million pounds of plastic. And we were guessing what that number is going to be for 2020. And she was guessing to be 3 to 4 times that, like 2
Yeah.
trillion tons of plastic, one company.
Yep.
So what's Surfrider doing around plastic?
Well, it's interesting. A quick aside: I saw this little short film, and the name is escaping me, but hopefully it'll come back to me. And it was about this Indonesian man who was 90 years old, and the story, kind of starts with him today, and he was a fisherman, and now he's collecting plastic instead of fish, and but he lived for the first half of his life in a world without plastic. So I think about that all the time, that in his 20s and 30s in Indonesia, there wasn't any plastic. Like it didn't exist, and before sort of, it was kind of a post World War II phenomenon. And since then, we've just seen this explosion in the use of plastic and the littering of plastic and everything else. It's a new phenomenon, and one of the horrifying stats kind of related to that story is, there's an estimate that by 2050, there'll be more plastic in the ocean than fish because we're taking out too many fish and adding too much plastic. But, and we've been cleaning it up on the beaches around the United States and the world for decades. And it wasn't until Charlie Moore, the Laguna Marine Foundation, former Surfrider volunteer, sailed to Hawaii and found plastic all the way between Long Beach and Hawaii that, 10, 15 years ago, that this sort of global consciousness of the scale of this problem came to be. And I think it's forced us all to look at this. I went to the supermarket and I grabbed those crappy thin bags for years without really thinking about it, and like everybody else. And so I think we've been like, okay, we're filling the ocean up with plastic. That's not okay. For us, we're really focused on source reduction. So we want to get rid of the sources of it, and we're really focused on what we call single-use plastics. This is the low-hanging fruit in our mind, right? So this is the stuff we use once and then can sit in the ocean forever. And so that's bags, foam, cups, straws, single-use bottles of water. One of the greatest scams perpetuated on humans. It's cost more than gas per gallon. It's something you get free at your house. So we're really focused on those single-use plastic items. They're the ones we find on the beach. Cigarette butts. They're the ones we find most commonly on the beach, and there's alternatives for just about all of them. So we're like, if we can get rid of that, we can get rid of 70-80% of the problem. And so we've been doing that. Our sort of method is we start by working in communities to ban these things locally. Laguna Beach bag ban, this is like 10 years ago now. Foam ban, straw ban. And then we try to get critical mass in the state, and we try to pass state legislation to ban these things statewide. So California, I'm trying to remember what year it was, 2014 or 16, banned single-use plastic bags and was the first state in the country. And there's now about 8 or 9 states that have banned some combination of bags, foam, straws, and these single-use plastics. So when that's been our focus. Now we have a federal bill, which I can tell you about too.
Yeah, we'll get into that. But when you look at like what's the biggest lever that can be pulled to make a difference, is it individuals demanding a different product, or is it policies being changed that just ban these things completely? Obviously, you're in the camp of both, but policy change is really the focus of Surfrider, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we're educating people and encouraging individual behavior, and I've got my my cup here and my reusable mugs. And of course, we should all be doing that. I don't think that would ever be enough to scale the problem. I go to shop at the Trader Joe's and I still see the wall of single-use plastic bottles there, so the consumer demand is for those sadly still exists. So that's why we think these policy decisions are really what needs to be done. And, part of the problem is that plastic is just so darn cheap. So, one of the big challenges is wrappers. So this is bag of chips. I mean, no matter how hard you try, you can't avoid this stuff, right? You walk into the supermarket and 80% of the stuff comes in a plastic wrapper of some sort. And part of the problem is it's cheaper to buy that virgin plastic than it is to use recycled plastic. So, there are these companies that are just continuing to use virgin plastic, which is a fossil fuel. And B, it costs them a penny to make that bag. And you think about the societal cost of that bag after you buy it. You use it, you dispose of it, either recycle it or throw it away, or it gets littered. any one of those, like the recycling, then some guy picks it up in front of your house. It's got to go somewhere. We're struggling to figure out what to do with that stuff because there's no market for it. Or it goes in a landfill, or it gets littered and has either ecological or environmental costs, or we're paying some guy at the beach to empty the trash bag. So, the company pays a penny and society pays for that thing over and over and over again until it's disposed of. And so one of the things we're trying to shift is something the technical term is extended producer responsibility, but basically it's the producer pays. So, hey, company Cheetos, we're going to charge you 5 cents for that bag instead of 1 cent. We're going to use for those other 4 cents to upgrade recycling, solid waste management, cleanup, and everything else, because you should be paying for the cost of that bag, not society. And we think if we do that, it'll really shift the market. All of a sudden, they won't be putting 10 chips in a little single-use bag. They'll be thinking of better ways to do it.
Or will they do that, or will they just raise the price a nickel and put it back on us?
Yeah, they might do that, but at least then hopefully there'll be resources to actually tackle the problem. Or maybe it'll cost 3 cents to get a recycled plastic instead of the virgin plastic, and they'll do that because they can get a credit for it.
Yeah, I've always thought on that, like, if enough consumers, to your point, yes, if we can change policy, great. And at the same time, if enough consumers say, hey, we don't want your plastic shit anymore, we're not buying it, come up with a better alternative, that they will.
Yeah, and I think those things should work together, because if consumers want alternatives and then there's opportunity to pass a law, they're more likely to vote for it because they're like, I'm not doing that anyway. Right. So I think those things put pressure in the same direction.
There you go. Anything else you want to share on plastic before we go to ocean protection?
Yeah. Oh, last thing. So there's a federal bill right now, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. It'll be reintroduced at the end of this month. We were working on it last year, and so this is a comprehensive bill that will deal with the manufacturing of plastic, which is like I said, it's made from natural gas, through the single-use plastic items and adding that recycling fee that we only have in some states, all the way through disposal, and it'll prohibit disposal in developing countries. So it's a great opportunity to really change the game nationally. So if you go to Surfrider's website, which you can give at the end, they can take action on that bill and support it.
Very good. Okay, good. Thank you for sharing that. All right, let's go to ocean protection. So I want to hear about what Surfrider is doing to protect ecosystems that are being threatened. But first, can you share what's the critical role that the ocean plays in climate change?
Yeah, great question. The ocean's really at the center of climate change. There's a great Arthur C. Clarke quote, which is, how inappropriate it is that we call this planet Earth when it's so clearly ocean, right? 70% of the planet's covered with ocean. So it's really ocean planet. So not surprisingly, that's the, where climate change is having, it's having so much impact on the ocean. And the ocean also regulates the temperature of the Earth. It wouldn't be habitable everywhere if it wasn't for the oceans. So, the oceans absorb 90% of the heat and 30% of the carbon. It's acidifying the ocean because that carbon, as it creates carbonic acid. So that's having an impact on some of the marine life like plankton and shellfish and other things. So, and it's, there's talks about the Gulf Stream on the East Coast slowing down, which moderates the temperature in Europe. We have, I found this really interesting. There was this warm water off the West Coast called the blob. So we had atypically warm water temperatures, right? 76 degrees, 78 degrees, Hawaii temperatures in California, which we almost never get. I think Scripps Pier recorded the highest temperature in 100 years a couple summers ago. And, everyone, it's not El Nino. What is this warm water blob? It had a lot of impacts on ecosystems in the state and in the Pacific off our coasts. And now they're calling it a marine heat wave. So what this is that heat that was absorbed into the ocean manifesting itself, coming back up to the surface and manifesting itself. So, it's been absorbing all that heat. Now it's starting to essentially bubble up and form these marine heat waves, which are having, devastating. It's great as a surfer to have the warm water and play at the beach, but it's having devastating impacts to our marine ecosystems. So,
Yeah,
the ocean is climate change.
yeah, exactly. So, what is that devastation? How are these ecosystems being threatened, and what are you guys doing about it?
Yeah, I mean, what they're seeing is, shifts in so a lot of the nutrients that are at the base of the food chain come from upwelling. So we get winds in the spring, we get upwelling, the cold nutrient rich water comes up, this feeds the plankton, and that becomes the chain of life for the small fish, the birds, the mammals, and everybody else. And it's all connected. So the this thermocline, this cold water warm water layer was so deep we weren't seeing that turnover, and so that was having that was part of the reason we were seeing these impacts. Sea lions starving, seabirds suffering, a lot of fish. So those are some of the impacts we're seeing. The acidification is affecting shellfish, so the shellfish industry up in the Pacific Northwest, the little larvae weren't viable because the water was so acidic. So it's having all kinds of impacts. You can try to mitigate against those in some ways. The other thing it's doing is increasing the sea level rise, right? So the seas are rising, which is going to affect beaches all across the country, and we're seeing stronger storms because that warm water is the fuel for hurricanes. But so for us, and it's another reason why these marine reserves are important. They create if the system's healthy and not stressed by other things, it's going to be more resilient to these challenges. So our focus is sort of trying to protect ocean health through things like marine protected areas. We don't do fishery management. It's just an issue that we don't tackle. Complex, important issue, but not something we work on. And we're trying to advocate for climate legislation. It's great to see it with the Biden administration. It's one of their top 4 priorities. That's the first time it's been a priority for any president in the history of the country. So that's exciting to see too. So, there's a great federal bill called the Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act, talking about this intersection between the ocean and climate solutions. And so we've been advocating for that as well.
Very good. Okay, so let's go to clean water. You mentioned water already. According to the CDC, 790 million people don't have access to clean water. 1.8 billion people, which is 25% of humans on this planet, don't have access to adequate sanitation. What can we do, and what is being done to change this?
Yeah, in the US, we're pretty lucky. We actually have access to clean drinking water for the most part. There's exceptions, of course, in the Flint, Michigans of the world, but generally we're in pretty good shape. That water, once it gets used, and if it's not, it's like the plastic, if it's not used wisely, it turns into urban runoff. And that's the number one source of, water quality, water pollution in coastal United States. We also have wastewater infrastructure challenges. So for us, we're again focused on this sort of on the coastal zone and but mostly marine recreational health, right? So the idea is, hey, we should be able to go out there and swim and surf without getting sick. It obviously has an impact on the health of the marine ecosystems as well. So we're really trying to tackle the urban runoff problem. We do a lot of water testing to highlight those problems, and then we're also advocating for these wastewater treatment systems to be upgraded. You hear about infrastructure failing in the United States, and it's not one a lot of people like to think about, but it's a really important one for keeping our coasts clean. So we're advocating for funding, and there'll be a big infrastructure bill coming from the Biden administration, and we're advocating for some of that money to go in something called the state revolving clean water fund, which would fund infrastructure improvements. We have 50 labs out there. We do water quality testing to raise awareness, and so those are some of our focus areas. Here, and we just had some rain in these last couple weeks. It's not safe to surf or swim for 72 hours after those rains without risk of getting ill. We'd like to see get to a world where it rains, it's okay to go in the ocean.
It's kind of a scary thought that here in the wealthiest country in the world, we have these issues. Like you said, yeah, it rains here. The next day, you probably don't want to go in the water.
Yeah.
And then you think about the rest of the world that doesn't have the infrastructure at all. It's
Yeah.
it's a pretty scary thought. So, but that's
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. We've invested a lot of money in providing clean water and doing a pretty good job of treating our waste. Unfortunately, the ocean still seems to be the place where it's okay for that to go, and that's sort of the last piece of the equation is for the United States really is trying to make sure that when it goes to the ocean, it's not causing problems there.
yeah. And look what is happening right now in Tijuana, which obviously the waste that's going into the water from there is going to come right here. I mean, it's not that far away. So, do you guys do anything in situations like that?
Yeah, we have a big campaign on that called the Clean Border Water Now. So, like as you're describing, the the border between San Diego and Tijuana is the Tijuana Sloughs and the Tijuana River. It goes right out at the coast at the border there, but starts in Tijuana, kind of flows down around and comes into the United States, and then flows out right at Imperial Beach. So their wastewater infrastructure, or the failure of it as Tijuana continues to sort of grow, is causing wastewater and pollution problems on both sides of the border. The locals that go to the beaches in Tijuana are suffering, as are the our side. So there's something called the International Boundary Water Commission, kind of a binational effort to clean that up, and it's expensive. We were able to help get about $400 million dedicated to solving that problem. So big dollars to manage these huge, facilities to treat all this waste.
Man, how do you? I gotta ask you, like, knowing what you know, how do you not get overwhelmed with all these issues? Like, how do you stay optimistic in the face of all this?
Yeah, I get asked that a fair amount because the problems are daunting, right? Like
Yeah,
these are real problems that we need to solve. But there's two things that kind of keep me going. One is we know how to solve them all. Like we can solve these things. We can solve the plastic pollution problem. We can solve the urban runoff problem. So I'm like, okay, like it's not something. A year ago we were like, can we solve COVID? It turns out we can. But like for these things, we know. And I get to work with people making a difference every single day. So, there are people probably tonight going to a city council meeting in different parts of this country advocating for a plastic ban or clean water improvements to their city. And so, when you're surrounded by people who are like, get off the sidelines and decide to make a difference, it's pretty motivating.
so the
You know,
awareness is there that might not have been, like you were saying about plastic. Like, I don't know when plastic was invented. Do you think the creators of it were sitting in a dark room saying, "This is really going to screw up the planet, but we're going to make so much money, we don't care"? Like, whether that happened or not, I don't know, but there was an awareness that it was a problem. So now at least we have
yeah.
awareness, and thanks to the work that you're doing, Surfrider and other great organizations, there's action being taken. So that's a
Yeah, we just need more of it.
yeah,
I always tell people it's just a numbers game.
yeah.
Like, we have 50,000 members, which we're thrilled about. If we had a million, we would be able to solve, 20 times more problems out there.
There you go. Well, and we'll get to that in terms of scalability of how you can continue to grow. But let's continue through the five areas. So beach access is next. Can you explain how is this a problem? Why is this a problem? And how does that compare? Some people might say, "Oh, access to the beach doesn't seem like nearly as big of a deal as plastic and dirty water and things like that." So beach access.
Yeah. It really depends on where you live. In Laguna Beach, where we live, we're blessed with great beach access at the bottom of every street, which is often the case. There's a staircase that goes to the beach. You know, the beach is public property, the ocean is public property. So we have this amazing commons that are shared resource for all of us. So, our philosophy is everyone should be able to go. Um, it's also the most coveted strip of real estate on the planet. So those are 10 million whatever plus homes in our town down at the beach. So there's this tension between people who want that for themselves and don't want the people there. So, we take beach access for granted, but there are people fighting to maintain it or in efforts to close it going on all across the country. We had a huge um, fight up in Central California at a place called Martin's Beach a few years back that went all the way to the Supreme Court. A wealthy tech guy named Vinod Khosla bought a ranch, had a road that went down to it to this Martin's Beach. Had been open for 100 years, and he tried to close the road, and we fought him through the courts all the way to the Supreme Court and won, and it's open now. So if Surfrider and the local chapter hadn't been up there, we as a community would have lost access to that place. So those are the kind of issues that we work on with beach access. We've opened up surfing. There's places historically that have been closed to surfing, so we've opened up surfing, particularly on the East Coast. We helped open up surfing in Chicago on Lake Michigan.
On Lake Michigan, nice.
One of the shifts that we've seen, which is really interesting in the last year, we used to feel like it was enough to make sure the physical path was there. So our job was like fight the fight with the law to make sure that the access stays open. You can't close that stairway or that path or whatever, the road to the beach. And one of the things we've learned is we're kind of like go through this period of self-examination as a result of sort of the George Floyd murder and this social and racial reckoning is, although the access path may be there, not everybody necessarily feels welcome there. And there's been a lot of historical racism, and segregation at beaches all across the United States. There's a really interesting issue taking place right now in Manhattan Beach up in LA. There's a place called Bruce's Beach. It was a historically black-owned resort area. They as a result of segregation and Jim Crow and other things, that those black owners of that land were basically chased out of town, and that it's funny. Bruce's Beach is now a park. Some black activists in LA have really done a good job of raising awareness about the history of that. Something that I didn't know in the past. There was other beaches. There was Inkwell Beach in Santa Monica, segregated beach. So we have a history of sort of structural racism and segregation at our beaches. And there's folks in Compton who live 3 miles from the beach who don't feel welcome at the beach, even though they could like ride their bike there in 15 minutes. So, we've really we're still fighting the fight on the access path, but we've really shifted gears to try to create support organizations and create programs to make sure everyone feels welcome at the beach.
So I'm glad you brought this up. I mentioned my brand new board that I just got maybe, 6 weeks ago. And the shaper of that board is Ryan Harris from Earth Technology.
I know Ryan.
I bet you do. And I did a little interview with him right at his studio when I got the board, and he went off on this whole rant because it had just happened for the second time recently.
Yeah.
Where, for people that don't know, Ryan's I call him the world's most famous black shaper. He's probably one of the only black shapers on the planet. You would know better than I, Chad. But they had 2 major racial incidents that just occurred, and he had told me the whole story about Bruce's, which I didn't know. But basically, they were called the N-word. They were told to go back to Bruce's, and this was like 2 months ago.
Yeah, I actually went up to the paddle out in response. So yeah, these 2 young black guys learned to surf this last summer. So excited about surfing, as anyone who kind of gets that opportunity to play on the ocean like we do. And they were out surfing at Manhattan Beach Pier. It was actually President's Day, so whatever the what was that, November 15th or something like that, 14th, and got into a little bit of a scuffle over wave priority stuff we were talking about earlier, and it very quickly escalated into some really nasty racial slurs and got ugly. And it's just horrifying that that's out there. There was a picture, 15 white guys surrounding these 2 young black surfers, and one guy was just an outright racist. What was kind of sad is the other 14 white guys just stood by and didn't say anything, let it happen. So the kids that happened to, young men, they organized a paddle out a weekend or two later, and I went up there for that in solidarity and support for what had happened. And Ryan was there, and it was actually, it was great to see. One, the community responded. There was about 200 or 300 people showed up, for the paddle. It was a peace paddle, right? And so it just made a very clear statement. Hey, we're not going to tolerate this in our community. It was really a beautiful event. There was high fives. People were stoked. I met people. There was like a lot of bonding. There was a lot of black surfers there, which was kind of cool to see. And it was just a sign that things are changing. Sadly, those assholes still exist, but it's a really exciting thing to see. And I came out away from that pretty inspired that there's a whole new wave of interest in surfing amongst Black, Indigenous, people of color. So it's cool to see.
That's amazing. Yeah, Ryan's awesome, and I love that. I love that this came up. I didn't expect it to necessarily.
Yeah. No.
How beach access, has become beach equality based on all the things that have come to the surface in the last year in this country. So as painful as these things have been, hopefully the flip side is going to be very, very different, and there'll become a day where it's no longer needs to be a conversation. So very good.
Yeah.
Good man.
The other thing, all of these amazing. Ryan helped start something called One People, One Planet.
That's right.
There's Brown Girl Surf. There's Black Girl Surf. There's another group called Color of the Water that we've been working with in LA. So there's also been this huge emergence of BIPOC-led sort of ocean beach surfing organizations, and those kids started something called Black Sand Surf. So that's also cool to see, right? There's a whole new wave of organizing around getting more folks out in the ocean.
Very cool. That's super cool. Okay, so last of the 5 focuses, and you kind of touched on it already, was coastal preservation. You can share anything else that you wanted to bring up, but what hit me, you mentioned the word marine parks earlier. And what I love about the no-take zone here in Laguna Beach is that it's just a great representation of what's possible, as I said, when we just leave the ocean alone. And I always wondered, why is the entire coastline of California not just how long is the coastline? What is it?
1,100 miles.
1,100. Why is it not just an 1,100-mile marine park? There's other parts of the world that have marine parks even bigger. Why, and maybe we can talk about the 30 by 30 initiative in this part of the conversation. Why don't we just protect, what is it, 14.9% last I saw of the coastline in California is marine protected? Why is it not just a huge marine park? Why it's our greatest financial asset. It's our, without that ocean right there, California is not California. What am I missing here?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question. And, backing up a little bit, historically, Laguna actually had a little marine reserve, tiny one, centered around Heisler Park, that was around since the 50s. So there were little dots of marine protection up and down the coast, but nothing comprehensive. And there was a bill passed in the, I think, early 2000s, the Marine Life Protection Act, and a couple of associated bills. And the goal was to create a uniform system of protection. So there's conservation areas, marine reserves, like there's 3 or 4 categories. They have different levels of protection. And then to build a network from the southern border to the northern border of the state in the state water. So every state has jurisdiction over the first 3 miles of water. So there's a 3-mile line. That's where the Laguna one touches. So that's state waters. And so, it took about, probably 12 to 15 years to implement the Marine Life Protection Act, and they were designing a network of these marine protected areas up and down the coast. And the goal was to, identify critical habitat that needed to be protected. So rocky reefs, kelp forests, seagrasses, headlands, and also make them connected. So a lot of the marine ecologists were modeling how larvae in the ocean moves. So, fish, marine life release larvae off Dana Point headlands, and that stuff, because it's sticking out so far, can float all the way down, to Oceanside or beyond to the next coral reef. Or rocky reef. So the idea was to connect them. And so they worked in stages up the coast. and it was a pretty ugly process because you had marine conservation folks who were trying to listen to the scientists who said, bigger is better, and there's kind of a minimum viable size for these things based on the life history of the fish, how far they travel. So you want to make it big enough that some fish never leave, so they can continue to grow, and small enough, arguably, so that some spill over the edges, and then you want them connected. And so, in the fishing community, you know, uh, didn't want to see this. I think in their minds, the ocean was kind of one of the last uh, lawless places. It was there's sort of freedom, which we all appreciate at some level, and you can go out there, and there's not private property lines, and you can go here, you can't go there, and for historically for hundreds and hundreds of years, we've been able to go out there and fish. And I'm still a fisherman, and I still spearfish and eat fish. But and so I can kind of understand. And of course, the places that are most ecologically rich are also the places that are best fishing. So, like real estate, it's about location, location, location. So the conservationists are like, these are the places we want to protect. And the fishermen are like, those are all the best places to fish. So that was part of the conflict. It was almost less about the percentage and more about where those were. And there's fishing is also pretty diverse, right? You have the wreck fishermen, and even that's diverse. You've got the party boats at a Dana Point. Then you got the guy with a spear gun who goes out there and gets one fish. Then you've got the commercial guys that range from the urchin divers to the lobster guys, all the way up to the big commercial guys. And and so I think trying to figure out how to balance conservation goals with the interests of the fishing community, which has an economy surrounding it, and finding those things was really hard because the sides just really warred. There were groups of these people really were heroes. There were working groups of the different interests that got together to design the parks, and I think they were the ones who really got into the trade-offs. But there's still a lot of bad will with the fishing community about the closures that did happen. And you're right. My understanding is that 9% of the California waters are in marine reserve, no fishing. And then another 7%-ish are in these marine conservation areas, which each one has kind of specific rules, like maybe no commercial fishing, but allowable spear fishing. They're all very specific. So yeah, somewhere between 9 and 16% is protected.
Yeah,
I
think you're
don't
right.
think that's a lot. The fishing community thinks it's too much, or some sector. of
That's
the
what I'm
fishing
saying. To me, it doesn't seem like a lot, and I love having this conversation with you because you're not someone that's like nobody should eat fish at all. Like, so
Yeah,
you're
there
not
are people who are militantly,
correct.
against fishing and eating seafood. I'm not one of them.
Correct. So it's good to have this conversation with you because I want you to explain the 30 by 30 initiative
Yeah.
because the only pushback that I've heard on that is from friends of mine that are fishermen that think it's horrible for the fishing industry. So as someone who's not anti-fishing, can you explain that initiative
Yep.
and why is this? Obviously, it's something, or you can confirm, but this is something Surfrider backs. So
Yes.
if you could explain it, and why Surfrider is behind it, and how fishermen can hopefully realize this is not going to put them out of business. I would imagine at the end of the day, it's a financial thing of why the fishermen give the most pushback.
Certainly for
Obviously,
some, yeah, and a historical, lifestyle thing too. And
that too for sure.
so you know, a collection of scientists, kind of globally recognized scientists, came out with this paper probably 3 years ago now, and they're like, "Hey, look, we are witnessing a climate change crisis and a biodiversity crisis, an extinction crisis in the world today, and if we are to solve those problems, we should protect 30% of the land and sea by 2030." So it was this call to action to say, hey, if we want to live on a planet that is, comfortable for, survivable for people, and we want to have some wildlife around us, uh, we really need to take some dramatic action. There's some estimates that we'll lose 90% of coral reefs in the world by 2050 if we don't tackle climate change. And overfishing is still a massive issue. 90% of the large predators in the ocean, the sharks are gone. So, serious global issues that warrant a big global response.
Right.
So that's the kind of the basis behind 30 by 30. Um, the IUCN, which I'm trying to remember what the acronym stands for, uh, is it's a big global body that's focused on this Convention for Biological Diversity. So it's kind of the parallel to the Kyoto or Paris Treaty on Climate. This is a big global sort of commitment to protecting the Earth's biodiversity, and so states or countries are starting to adopt this. So Biden, in his executive order that he passed in early January on climate change, included a 30 by 30 commitment. I think there's 57 countries across the globe that have made this commitment. Gavin Newsom signed an executive order to commit California to 30 by 30. So there's momentum behind this idea of saving the planet. Nature and climate are closely connected, right? Because there's 5 times as much carbon in the soil as there is in the atmosphere. So that's why rainforests and coral reefs are seagrasses. These are all wetlands, are all carbon sinks. So protecting nature is going to help us defend against climate change. So that's kind of the big picture. Now, if you were a fisherman and you thought 16% was way too much, this idea of 30%,
okay,
is scary to them. I get that. It hasn't been very well defined what that 30% looks like. So in California, the first step is literally to define protection. So I think there was this sort of like leap to this conclusion that California is going to double the number of marine reserves in the state, and so we're going to lose even more fishing grounds. And what I've heard from the fishermen are, how would you feel if 30% of the surf spots in California were going to be closed? And I would not be happy about that. Of course, surfing doesn't have a material impact; it's not taking, so it doesn't quite equate. But emotionally,
yeah,
I understand that idea. Hey, Rich, if we took 30% of the places you love to paddle off the table, you'd feel a sense of loss.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Yeah, and on the flip side, hey, look, we're gonna have to make some sacrifices. Obviously, the things we've been doing in the past that got us here need to change if we want to change the trajectory of the climate and the biodiversity of our planet. So for me, I think it really comes down to how that is done in a way that meets the science requirements, achieves the goals to stabilize the climate and protect biodiversity, which there's still a lot of work to be done on what that is, definition of protection, and also then a process that includes the stakeholders in the community. And I think the other thing, kind of referring back to some of the beach access stuff we were talking about, is it needs to be equitable too, and take into consideration more than the rich white people that live at the beach, and take the interests of everybody into these are shared resources, public resources for all of us. So I think there's a big I've heard that the 30 by 30 process, both in the state, nationally, and globally, is equity is a big part of that too.
Interesting.
So I think right now in my mind, it's not a question of if these things are moving forward. It's a question of how, and what that looks like, and we intend to participate in those processes, advocate for conservation, and also advocate for recreational uses. I personally think, the concept of a marine protected area almost exclusively got focused on fishing, no fishing. But there's a lot of uses in the ocean that have impact. So I think we should broaden the concept of marine protection. There's shipping industry and their impacts. There's these, we still pump wastewater out of pipes that go out into the ocean. So we're still doing that. There's sort of a variety. There's the plastic pollution issue. So I think we can, if we look at the concept a little bit more broadly than fishing, no fishing, there's a lot of problems we could solve that improve the health of the ocean that don't necessarily have to take away all fishing rights. So I feel like there's a balance to be had there.
For sure. And so if I'm hearing you right, it's it's defining more what 30 by 30 means. And I could see the fishermen just thinking, "Oh, wait, they're gonna." I think it's not just an emotional thing, but it's a financial thing. Like they're gonna put me out of business. So I'm not gonna be able to feed my family. I'm gonna push back. So defining it better, and then, like you said, creating this equitable situation, which seems to be a thread in this conversation, which needs to happen across the board. So it's not left versus right, me against you. It's, hey, we can create, and it goes back to the core issue in my mind of how do we create a situation where 8 billion people can live in harmony on this planet? And I think what we've seen over the past year has been a very small taste of we don't know how. And as a result, all these bad things have happened, which have been this wake-up call. Like, we got to figure this stuff out. Because if you think what's been happening the past year has been bad, just wait. I always give this analogy that the Earth, one of two things is going to happen. Either A, we're going to learn how to live in harmony with each other and the planet, or B, the planet's going to be like, you know what? We were way better off before you two-leggeds were here. We can't survive. This is not a survivable thing for the planet, and we're going to be spit off. And hopefully, thanks to the work that you're doing, we're going to figure this out, which leads me to what you were saying before about scaling. Right? I think you said you have 50,000 members now, and if you had 1 million that were preaching and taking action and making, driving change, that we could make a lot of change. So tell me about the Surfrider, how do I say it? The model. Are you happy with the model of Surfrider? Are there changes that can be made to help scale it to get to that 1 million people? In terms of people, scalability, fundraising, what would you change?
Yeah, it's funny. I do think I think the model's incredibly effective. I can't take credit for it. I inherited it.
Yeah.
I think the grassroots model and working in communities with people who are really facing the issues and who are passionate and care is really effective. When you work in your local community and you live there, you're gonna understand the issues. You're gonna understand the local context, and you're also gonna promote solutions that are practical, because you got to bump into your neighbors in the supermarket and your city council members. So you're not going to promote fantastical things, and so I think it grounds the solutions in reality, which I think is important. And then we can scale that work to the state and work at state level government, and then get up all the way, like this Plastic Pollution Act, all the way up to the federal level. So I think that model of starting local and scaling is really effective. We've been growing. We had 14 chapters when I started. Now we have 80, 20 years later. The pace is not quick enough compared to the scale of the problem. So, for us, it's how do we build more chapters, train more activists, we have about 140 active campaigns across the country right now. Like, how do we get that to 300? And part of that is, we're a charity. So part of that is fundraising, and I encourage everyone to sign up to be a Surfrider member. $25. It's your, Starbucks budget for a week. And that membership helps fuel the training and the science and all the work we do. It also gives us political power, because the more members we have, the more clout we have with decision makers as well. So I think the model is designed to scale. We just need to kind of continue to scale it. And that's a matter of getting people to volunteer and to join and to support the organization.
So people can support financially. That's easy. How do new chapters get formed? If someone said, "Oh my God, I love this," and a chapter doesn't exist in my town, how does that process happen?
Yeah, we go through a chartering process, so they kind of have to prove that they're interested. You know, they have to sign up 25 members. They kind of have to establish some meetings. Like, so we have a pretty well articulated process. And if they go on our website, surfrider.org, they can learn how to form a chapter. We have a new chapter forming in Oregon right now.
Nice.
So yeah, so you can form a chapter, or you can get involved. You know, we have 20 chapters in California. So, there's probably one not too far from anywhere. If you live in the state who's listening, you can find one.
Beautiful. So a few more questions. I appreciate you giving me all this time today. So
Oh yeah, no, my pleasure.
we've said a few times about how you and I were blessed. Like I said at the beginning, you were born here. It took me many years, but I found this place. And to be honest, we live in a bubble here in not just in Laguna Beach, but in Orange County, California. It's definitely a bubble. And like we said, we can walk to the beach anytime that we want. And most people can't do that. So how do we put more emphasis on access to open spaces for mental health, physical health, spiritual health, emotional health?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, one of the other things that COVID revealed is that, access to open space is not evenly distributed. And, you know, everybody should, whether it's an urban park or nature, I feel like everyone should have access to the outdoors in a way that's safe and healthy, and we don't have that. So I think that's part of that is better. LA County's terribly park poor. So some of this is figuring out how to invest in parks and building more parks into our urban environments, so that because that's where most of Americans live, is in urban places.
Mm-hmm.
And providing public transportation to our open spaces, whether that's the beaches or our terrestrial open spaces, and then, as I said, actually creating an environment where everyone feels welcome, and so I think that those are key. I do think that's going to be a lasting trend that comes out of and positive trend that comes out of COVID. Is I think we'll see more outdoor recreation this year and moving forward, which is great. We just need to figure out how to manage it in a way that we can get along with each other and not impact the places we love.
Beautiful. All right, I have two final questions. You brought up one I didn't know I was going to ask, but you brought up an octopus handshake.
Oh yeah.
I got to tell a quick personal story. So I saw My Octopus Teacher, which I'm sure you've seen.
Yep.
I saw it the day that it came out, and I was blown away. And then I watched it again, it was probably about 2 months ago. And I liked it better the second time. I got even more emotional watching it the second time, just everything about it. If you haven't seen My Octopus Teacher, go watch it tonight.
Yeah, wonderful
And
film.
the day after the last time that I saw it, I was paddleboarding at sunset, and I saw my neighbor, and she was on the tide pools. I'm not going to share exactly where, but she was at sunset, crouched down on the ground at sunset in tide pools, and it's not a normal thing for her to be doing. And when I got back on land, I said, Karen, what were you doing there? And she sent me a video of an octopus. And so I went the next day. I kind of knew where she was because I saw where she was standing. It took me an hour, but I found this octopus. And then now there's 6 of them
Wow.
in a couple different areas. I can show you.
Yeah.
And I've gone there every single day for the last 2 months at low tide. If you follow me on Instagram, you've seen this. I've only posted a handful of things because I don't want to draw too much attention, and I've not shared the location. But I've just been like blown away by this, just being able to witness these octopus. So tell us about the octopus handshake.
Well, yeah, I mean, also, as you probably know, they're this crazy creature. Like, they don't fit. I can't remember if they have 4 hearts.
3.
Their neural system is at 8. Their neural system is distributed.
I think it's 3 brains and 8 hearts or something like that.
Yeah, and like they're 8 legs. I do know that, but their neural system is like distributed out, so they can kind of operate each tentacle independently. So their brain isn't as centralized as ours. I mean, they're invertebrate, no backbone. So they're just a wild creature, and they're smart. So my dad had this octopus in his aquarium in his lab in Dana Point, and he would get there early before the kids showed up every morning, and he would go around and feed the fish in the aquariums in the morning. And so it got to the point where he could feed this octopus, and it would see him coming, and it would come out from under its hole in the rock it was hiding. It would come out and greet him, and he'd feed the fish. And so, then he got to the point where he could hold the piece of fish over the top of the tank and reach one of its tentacles out and grab the fish out of the water and pull it in. And so, it got to then he got to this point where it was like one of those great like parlor tricks, right? He'd be talking to he had a bunch of kindergartners in the classroom. He'd be talking to them. He'd walk over to the tank, and as he walked over, the octopus would come out from under the rocks to say hi, and he'd hold his finger up above the tank, like this, and it would reach up and wrap its tentacle around his finger, and he could like shake its hand. So pretty magical, and it's also interesting. He had it for over a year, I think, or over 9 months, and then it laid eggs. And which is interesting in itself because it was by itself, so it had like stored the semen or whatever in its, which is also kind of a miraculous, like they can choose when to be pregnant, and then laid these eggs and tended after them. And it's sad because they die at some point after they lay their eggs. And so he then had hundreds of little dime-sized baby octopuses in his tank, and the mother died, and so he released them out into the ocean, and you kind of just who knows, you hope the little guys, some of them are out there generations later, but kind of a magical, this is for me, this is like what I grew up thinking, oh, this is normal.
That was the devastating part of the movie, was that you find out that this is the part that makes no sense to me from a nature standpoint, that an animal so complex, so conscious, only lives a year.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for anyone that hasn't seen the movie, but that blew me away. That octopus,
spoiler alert, yeah,
major spoiler, only lives a year. And then I found out that the ones here, they're California 2-spot, and they live like 2 years. So, and these ones have been here at least 2 months that I know of, and I think they've been here longer, so I'm not sure how long.
Yeah, they're territorial, right? Like in the movie, so they find a little hole, and they hole up in that, they make a house, and they kind of roam, but they come back to that same spot. So once you find them, you can kind of.
They're in the exact same spot. What I don't know is if they go out. There's a lot of mussels and stuff right there, so I don't know if they just stay there or at high tide. I'm not sure if they're going out and hunting in the ocean, but
crabs, whatever they're doing, yeah.
But if you're down, I'm happy to show you. I'm happy to show you where they are. So
I will definitely take you up on that.
It's amazing. We'll do it for your father. So is your father still alive, by the way?
Yeah, he's actually, great. Quick aside, my parents live up in Washington State now. They lived here most of my life, and they got vaccinated, and they're down visiting Laguna this week. So first time I saw him last night for the first time in a year.
Oh my God! Well, if your dad wants to go visit the octopus, I'd love to meet him and see you. I haven't seen you in way too long. That would be amazing.
I'm gonna take you up on that.
Oh my God, that would be amazing. So last question.
Yes.
You have twin boys. Just graduated. Was it just this year they graduated high school?
They're freshmen in college now. They graduated last spring.
Beautiful. So I'm just curious, the work that you do, how is it influenced by them and just the whole idea of creating a better future for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have identical twin boys, who I adore. I was able to give them the gift of the ocean too, right? And so, they are better surfers and better watermen than I. So, every generation takes a level up, which, fills me with pride. Last summer they did the Catalina paddle to Newport, which is a pretty big deal. Yeah. They're really great surfers and have a profound love for the ocean. So the generation of Nelsons who love the ocean continues. And yeah, it's certainly, not a new experience for parents to say, oh, you very quickly realize like, okay, like I'm now focused on the next generation, and so you think about the world we're going to leave them. And, it's really interesting. These kids their age, uh, they have a very different beliefs about climate change and the environment than our generation, and even more than our parents' generation. That's another reason for optimism. Before COVID shut everything down in December of 2019, there was these global climate marches. It was all youth driven. There's a great group called the Sunshine Movement. That's another group that's driving climate action. They're like, hey, you and I might be like, oh, we'll be old or dead by the time the worst impacts are here. They're like, this is going to be in our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the seriousness with which they take the issue and the demands they have are spot on. And my kids fit into that category. They're like, are you kidding me? We're going to cook. Like, let's stop this. And I think they also believe we can live a pretty rich and healthy life without fossil fuels.
That's awesome.
So we're doing it for them and the generation after that and beyond.
Chad, this has been a great conversation. I think we hit on everything I wanted in terms of the issues and hearing your backstory and just, hearing about your father and how he influenced you and ending with your kids. We come full circle. So thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to share links of everything that you mentioned. There were so many different things that came up.
Stuff. Yep.
Yeah, send me links. We'll share links, everybody, so you can check out. Obviously, go to surfrider.org, and we'll share links for all the different policies and things that Chad and I covered today. Chad, I appreciate you. I appreciate your organization. I appreciate people like Pete Stouffer and Katie Day that have been huge advocates of what we're doing at Project O with the Blue City Network. They've been amazing. Yep. You are surrounded by amazing people, and they have a great leader in you. Chad, thank you so much. Thanks, brother.
Thank you, Rich. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.